Hari Om. In our previous videos, we discussed what are web form fundamentals, and we have also seen the two important events of a web form, post back and non post back event. By the time we have also discussed what is a view state and how it is used for the state management of a web page. Now in this video we are going to talk about the life cycle of a web form. Now when you have a web server, all the web documents will be stored in a web server. Whenever a client places a request to the web server, the server creates a response in a HTML format and that will be posted back to the client. Now, request to this web server will cause a chain of events at the server. Now, all these events that are happening in a web form right from the beginning to the end of a web page is what you call as life cycle of a web page and all its components. So, all those events which are happening right from the beginning or the creation of a web form till the web form is disposed, which you call as end of the web form, is known as life cycle of the web page and all its components. Now life cycle generally begins when there is a request for a web page. Say you place a request to the web server for a particular web page, then the life cycle of the web form begins. Now when the request is complete, the page will be unloaded and the goal is to render appropriate HTML page back to the requesting browser. So this is what happens in the life cycle of a web form. So when there is a request placed for a web page, the life cycle of a web form begins, and until the page is unloaded or disposed, the life cycle will be there, and it ends when the web page is unloaded or disposed. So by this or during this period, how the server renders the HTML page is what you call as life cycle of a web form. So life cycle is generally marked with 10 different events which we will be discussing now. And ASP.NET performs specific processing at each stage. For each event, all these 10 events are happening during the life cycle. So for each event, you will have a particular processing being done by the server. So we can attach event handlers to any of these events to perform additional work. And all of us know that whenever there is an event, there will be an event handler also. So by default, the server will be doing some kind of processing in all these event handlers. Apart from that, if the programmer or the developer wants their own statements or code to be executed in these event handlers, that can also be added. So the first event in the web form lifecycle is what you call as initialize event, and it is the first phase in the lifecycle for any web page or user control. Any settings needed for the duration of the incoming request are initialized. So whatever settings are required to place the request to the server, all these settings will be done in the initialize event. The second event is what you call as load view state event. We have already seen what is a view state. So whenever you are posting the request to the server, all the state information should also be saved, right? So loading view state is the second event that happens during the life cycle. The view state lives in a hidden input tag. So for handling the view state management, there will be hidden input tag in the HTML. You can observe there, apart from the input tags what you have studied in the HTML, like you have the tags like text box, input box, or submit button, or some the basic HTML controls like making some text bold or italic. Apart from all these tags, you have a tag called as hidden input tag, and this tag is the one which will be used in the view state. So when ASP.NET first renders a page, it generates this hidden input tag field, and the view state field is used to persist the state across round trips to the server. So whenever you want to preserve the state information during the round trip, the view state field will be used. Which is the view state field here? The input tag, hidden input tag is the view state field. And this allows the ASP.NET to manage the state of your control across the page loads, so that each control is not reset to its default state each time the page is posted. So it will not be reset with its default state, it will be always set with the current state of the user control. That is the advantage here. So load view state will be having a hidden input tag where all the value state information will be stored in the hidden input tag. Then what it is going to do, this next event is what you call as processing the postback data. So in this phase, the data sent to the server in the posting is processed. So whatever data is sent to the server, that will be processed in the process postback data. Then the next event is what you call as load event. So in the load event, a method called as create child controls. This is the method that is available in a web form. Create child controls will be called, and this creates and initialize the server controls in the control tree. Then the state will be restored, and the form controls contain all the client side data. So this is what happens in the loading. So the loading will make all, it will create all the child controls, and whatever data is to be restored in these child controls will also be loaded. So once it is loaded, it will be sending the postback change modifications. What do you mean by this? If there are any state changes between the current state and the previous state, the change events are raised via the raise post data change event method. So this is the method which will make all the modifications. So if you have any data change from the current state, from the previous state to the current state, this change or this modification will be done by the method called as raise post data change event. Then you have the next event called as handling postback events. The client side event that caused the postback will be handled here. Then you have the next event called as pre-render. So this is where the last stage of rendering happens. So that is before the final HTML is being rendered. This becomes the previous step. So pre-rendering. Rendering is what you call as generating the HTML that will eventually be sent to the browser. So before it creates the last HTML page, if you have any what do you call the properties, the control properties are to be modified, all those things can be done in the pre-render event. Then you have save state. So near the beginning of the life cycle, the persisted view state was loaded from the hidden variables. Now all these values will be saved back to the hidden variables, persisting a string object that will complete the round trip to the client. So everything will be now saved back. So there it was loaded to the server, and now it is being saved back to the hidden variables, because now it is creating a new HTML page, right? See what happens when you are placing the request, the client request will go as a HTML page. By the time all the view state values will be loaded, right? Then what you are going to do, when the server is recreating the HTML page, here it is recreating the HTML page. By the time all these hidden variable values must be saved back to the newly created HTML page. So that is what happens here. Then it goes for the rendering event. This is where the output will be sent back to the client browser, and then finally it goes to the dispose event. The dispose event is the last phase of the life cycle. It gives you an opportunity to do any final cleanup and release the references to any expensive resources such as database connection, etc. So before it is unloading the web page or disposing the web page, if you have any what you call housekeeping processing to be done, all these things can be done in the dispose event. So this is the last event of the web form life cycle. So in the web form life cycle, the initialize event will do all the initialization settings. Then all the view state information will be loaded into the server. Then the server will be processing the postback data. Then it will be creating all the child controls to store the previous state information. Then if there are any modifications from the previous state to the current state, that will be done by the raise post data change event method. Then all the postback events will be handled, processed by the server. Then the server will be doing the pre-rendering. So if any control properties are to be modified, then that will be done in the pre-rendering event. Then all the state information that are loaded from the client request will be saved back to the newly created HTML page. Then the rendering event happens. This is where the output will be sent back to the client browser. So once it is given to the client, and if the client is unloading the web page, or if the client is moving from that web page to another web page, automatically this web page will be disposed. By the time you can do all the cleanup activities or housekeeping activities can be done at the dispose event. So these are the 10 different events that are happening during the life cycle of a web form. Thank you.